till we start going. Welcome everyone to our weekly Meet a Scientist series coming at you from the Youth BioLab. We're really glad to have guests from the Research Center with us every week so we can learn a little bit more about our staff and all the people that are actually doing scientists here. So we're here in Winnipeg, Manitoba, part of Treaty 1 territory, and it's the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. And we're lucky to be healthy and able to keep working today and sharing with you some of the science that we do here at the Research Center. So today, I'm really glad to share with you a little bit about our guest, Chelsey Walchuk. She is a clinical dietitian. So she's really interested in foods, and she works right now as a PhD candidate in Dr. Suh's lab. So Dr. Suh runs a lab that's part of both the Division of Neurodegenerative Disorders, so really interested in nerves and how they stay healthy and how they can become damaged and diseased. She's also part of the the Canadian Centre for Agri-Foods Research in Health and Medicine. So looking at foods that we think might actually be able to keep us really healthy. So Chelsey's job here, I'll let her tell you a little bit more about it, but she's doing a current study on different dietary fats and how they can affect the aging prostate. So I'd like to welcome Chelsey to the show today. Welcome, Chelsey.
Hi.
So you have a few different titles, and different people come to the Research Center with different backgrounds. Some of them are getting into med school. Some of them are really interested in hearts and brains, and you're coming at it from a foods background already. So that's great as part of CCARM. But when you started in university, you went through to become a dietitian. Can you tell us a little bit about that schooling? Like, where did you go to university, and what do you have to learn to become a clinical dietitian?
Sure. So to be a dietitian in Manitoba, it's a little bit different depending what province you're in. So in Manitoba, you do a 4-year undergraduate degree, which was for me at the University of Manitoba. I've done all my school there. And so within those 4 years, you learn all kinds of stuff, some things from biochemistry to things more about how the role of food in diseases and how to keep us healthy. And then other things like community nutrition. So how do we improve food security, which means, having enough food on your table all the time. So dietitians will work in that area too. So in that you do those 4 years, and about at year 3, you apply for what's called a dietetic internship. And so every year in Manitoba, 20 people will get in to do a dietetic internship. Yeah, it's very competitive.
How many people are, sorry to interrupt you,
no problem.
How many people are in your cohort or your group of dietitians that are trying to get those internships?
So I'd say that it's different every year. I think in my year, there might have been about 40 people that were trying to apply at the time, but it ranges anywhere from maybe 30 to 60 a year or so. Okay. So there's 20 spots. And then if you get that, then you finish off your degree, and then you spend about 10 months doing all this hands-on work and working with dietitians in hospitals and in community centers and all over. And then you write what's called the Canadian Dietetic Registration Exam. And once that's all done, you can finally call yourself a dietitian.
So where did you get to do your internship?
So my internship was all over Winnipeg mainly, but I was also in Brandon for a while. So in the hospital there, as well as I did some public health stuff. So it didn't even really have to do with food. It was just health in general, how to stay active and healthy. And then in Winnipeg, it was a lot at the Health Sciences Center, as well as Concordia Hospital, and dietitians also play a role in creating all of that hospital food and managing that too. So kind of all over the place.
So as part of your internship, then it's not like you're doing one project. Like sometimes we have people come on and they're master's students and they're working on one project, but to be a dietitian, your internship is kind of seeing a lot of the different applications of clinical dietitians' work.
Exactly. So it's kind of similar in a way to other health professions. Like with nursing, you do it kind of throughout your degree, but with us, we get kind of all that hands-on experience in that 1 year. So we have to cover all different areas, working with people with diabetes or kidney disease in the hospital, or people who maybe had surgery, and then also outside, right, doing just those other things like just average healthy eating, or maybe dealing with people who are trying to lose weight or gain weight, or all kinds of different things.
Okay, so that sounds like a really broad application or choices of jobs that you could do.
Yeah.
How did you decide that you wanted to keep going with that? And like right now, you're a PhD candidate. So can you tell us a little bit about what that means, or what you have to do to get from being a clinical dietitian to finding where you're going to do your PhD work, and how long that is going to take for you?
Sure. So I had started my undergraduate degree in 2009. So that's 4 years. And right at the end, I actually got a research award. So this allowed me to actually work with Dr. Suh, who I'm still working with, and get some experience in research before I started my dietetic internship. So this was supposed to just be a summer position, and I fell in love with doing research in that time. So I started to do a master's degree with Dr. Suh while I waited a year, before my internship started.
Oh, so you've been with that lab for a long time then.
A really long time,
That's
exactly.
really nice. I'm gonna share my screen again because this is a picture of the lab where where Chelsey is working right now. And when I was looking up their bio on our sbrc.ca website, you can kind of find biographies of all the different principal investigators. And Dr. Suh's lab looks genuinely like just such the happiest team of people. I kind of want to work there. I mean, I really like my job too, and my lab's great, but this looks like a really great group of people. So can you tell us a little bit about that lab dynamic, and, how you work together, or are your projects really independent? And because Dr. Suh's lab actually studies a really broad group of diseases and foods that affect diseases compared to some of our labs that might study like one cell type that's involved in heart disease after a heart attack, and they might study that thing for 20 years. Dr. Suh's lab seems to have lots of different projects going on. So can you tell us a little bit more about what that lab team is like and how you're all mixed together?
For sure. We are actually, like, I'm glad that you said that, because we are a really unique lab in that we are very, very broad and very diverse. When you showed that picture, that's actually when I was doing my master's. That's when our lab was at our biggest. There was a lot of people in it. It's much more trimmed down now. So there's only a few of us left. But I like the lab dynamic has been so great, although we do very different studies, each different student, they're all intertwined in some way. We like to call ourselves a lipid lab. So lipids are the scientific term for fats. So pretty much everything we do does revolve around lipids and studying their role in health and disease. So right now we have a student who's looking at lipids in the brain, and I'm looking at lipids in the prostate. And then another one of our students is looking at how diet actually can maybe prevent fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. So that's a problem that you get when pregnant women drink alcohol. So very, very broad, but at the same time, we're constantly working together and learning from each other. And it's a really, really great team.
Yeah, that's a really important part of working in science that I think, especially students, in elementary school and in high school, studying science don't necessarily picture, because we often see like scientists being some like reclusive person working away on their little project in a lab, but every lab really works like as a team on kind of, as their broader area. So if your lab is looking at fats, that kind of, fat is like a bad word. It brings up all these feelings of, like, oh, I eat too much fats, or fats aren't healthy. But some of the work that we're doing at the research center in your lab specifically, as I look through, it's not necessarily like you can't eat fat because fat's all bad, but really the specific qualities of certain fats and how, so different fats might behave differently inside the body. And you're working on the prostate too, which is another one that, like people are maybe starting to hear about a little bit more with programs like, Mustache Movember, advertising against, or not against, but in support of prostate research and specifically for prostate cancer. But it's still kind of a mysterious organ for a lot of people. So can you explain a little bit behind your research on, like what is the prostate, what does it do, and how does it change as people are aging? Because that's kind of what your project is on, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the prostate, it's funny because even before starting my PhD, the prostate is really something that I didn't know that much about, or really kind of learned too much about kind of in my education.
It was also a bit out of my wheelhouse. So when you volunteered to be interviewed, I definitely did a little bit of research on, what is the best way to describe it. And I haven't heard about it since like health class in high school. And even then it didn't seem that important, but prostate problems seem to affect a lot of people. So
they do. It's actually very, very common. So the prostate it's like a golf ball shaped gland. And it's found just below the bladder in people that are born with a penis. And so I know that you had shown me a really great diagram. So
yeah, I'll share that so that everyone can kind of see what you're talking about. There it is. Okay, so this is your diagram of
this perfect
that includes the prostate.
So here you can see it perfectly just right below the bladder. So of course the bladder is where we are able to hold urine. And then when it fills up, we have to release that by urination or peeing. So the prostate, it is about the size of the golf ball in somebody who is an adult. And so what it's actually there for is to help produce something called semen. And so semen is what allows sperm to kind of leave the body. And it has a number of functions, actually. It helps with providing sperm cells the energy they need to move. If you think of a sperm, right, it kind of almost looks like a little fish. And so that movement, it requires a lot of energy. So semen helps that. It also helps create a nice environment to keep those cells safe as they move, out of the body, and then to help with fertilization of an egg, which would then, of course, make a baby. So it does have a really important function. Now, in the case of aging, what we tend to see is that prostates grow in size. So this is called benign prostatic hyperplasia. And what benign means, it's that it's not cancerous, but hyperplasia is the growth. And so you can see in this other side of the picture that you have here, the growth actually can cause a lot of issues. So here it's kind of pushing into the bladder. It's kind of compressing the urethra, almost like if you were to kink a garden hose, right? So if you kinked a garden hose, you can't have that flow of water. So urine is actually kind of getting stuck. And so in that case, in men, people with prostates, as they get older, they have a lot of problems with urination. It can cause infection and lead to needing surgery or different types of things.
Wow.
Yeah. So sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, I think you might actually have just been about to answer what I was going to ask. I was going to ask, how common are these problems?
Exactly. So it's very, very common. So 80% of people with a prostate will have benign prostatic hyperplasia by 80 years of age. So it's the majority of people.
Wow.
Yeah.
Whoa. Okay. The majority of people with the prostate. Because
Absolutely.
I have a prostate and
no, so then you will be fine. But if you have a prostate, chances are with aging, you will deal with this issue.
Okay. So, and we hear all the time, like eat this, it's good for you. Don't eat this, it's bad for you. But you're looking specifically at some different types of fat that might actually affect how that prostate changes with aging. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I'll jump back to us now. We can stop sharing that whole thing.
So I think you're really right when we think of, when talking about fat, we think of fat kind of as a bad thing. But we actually
But also a really tasty thing. Like, I'm looking forward to a lot of the holiday rest and, you know, the super nourishing for the soul foods that come with it that we all really need right now. So yeah, what do we do? What do we do about wanting fat?
So I think when it comes to holiday season, just go for it. That's what holidays are for. And we deserve it.
Love that answer.
It's a hard year. But throughout the rest of the year, our bodies need fat. There are certain types of fat that are what we call essential. So we have to have them. But we tend to think of fat as this kind of bad thing that just collects in our body and does bad things, but it's really not. It has so many diverse functions in the body. And in the case of the prostate, we know that fat is affecting the prostate in the different types of fat that we eat, but we don't really know why or how. And that's kind of what I'm trying to find out. So we have evidence to show that certain fat, like saturated fat, which is often something you hear, it's kind of more of the bad fat. So
trans fats, are those the same thing?
Very similar, but different. So trans fats, which are actually, are illegal in Canada now. So you can't have foods
legal in Canada?
Yeah. So I think 2 years ago, you can't use trans fats in foods anymore. So if you go to get a donut, it's not going to have them anymore. So it's good.
Interesting.
And that's a good thing because trans fats are quite bad in that they increase our risk of heart disease. But we still have lots of saturated fat in our diet because it comes naturally in foods. Whereas trans fats, they're kind of produced. So saturated fat, things like eating lots of animal meats or things like lard and butter, we get a lot of saturated fat there. And those guys can show some more detrimental effects and we think can also promote the growth of the prostate that happens with age.
Okay. So eating more eating more of these saturated fats, you see an increase in prostate size with age.
Well, that's what we think, right? We're still really investigating it, but it does seem to be a major link in that case, whereas other types of fats that are maybe a little bit more healthy, things like we call monounsaturated or polyunsaturated fats.
We always see those abbreviated as MUFA and PUFAs.
Exactly. MUFAs and PUFAs are the most fun words to say.
Yeah. I'll share it just for our viewers because this is the kind of thing that probably we don't start learning a lot about until we get into university and are looking at biochemistry and organic compounds. But so, you know, when you think of fat, you probably think of like your butter or your lard as like a solid at room temperature. And then these MUFA and PUFAs, unsaturated fats, they're more liquid at room temperature. And if we look at it at the molecular level, I'll share kind of what that looks like because it's really the structure of the fats that changes their solidity or their state and room temperature. And so a saturated fat like this one, you can see they're made up of hydrocarbon chains here. So a bunch of carbons in a row, and they're just straight in a line. And so that allows many of them to kind of pack up tightly or close together. And they make, in some cases, like butter, I think is a crystal structure, but they're like more solid and rigid, but at the molecular level, they behave differently inside the body. And unsaturated fats, so this one on the bottom, you can see there's a difference in the number of hydrogens, and it just causes the carbons in there to create a little kink in that chain. So if we tried to lay a lot of these unsaturated fats out together, that kink would mean that there's a little bit of space between them and the next one, and that helps them move a little bit more, right? So can you give us some examples then of like what are some of the good unsaturated fats that we should be eating more of?
Yeah, absolutely. So that one you showed is mono unsaturated fatty acid because it had that one kink, right? So that's actually one of the most common ones that we eat is called oleic acid. It's found in foods like olive oil or avocado and avocado oil. And here in Manitoba, we actually make high oleic canola oil, which has tons of oleic acid in it.
How do they make it high oleic canola oil?
You know what? That's a really great question. I actually don't fully know, but I imagine what they do is extract or remove oleic acid from oil, and then they would add it back. But I don't know all of the production details.
Okay. Sorry, that just came up off the top of my head. I wasn't trying to throw a hard ball at you.
No problem. It's a great question. But so oleic acid is something that we do commonly get in our diet, but sometimes we do tend to focus more on those saturated fats because they're really delicious and they come in a lot of really good foods. But oleic acid we think has some really beneficial properties, especially potentially in the prostate. As we've kind of seen in some other research, it might actually prevent that growth that happens with age.
So, how would you go about studying that? Like, are you forcing people to eat certain types of fat? Can you put a person on a totally lard diet to see what it does to their prostate? Or, like, that might take a really long time. So, how do you actually go about studying the prostate?
Yeah, so we actually get to feed rats these first, but we can eventually also get to giving humans like different types of fats as well. And we've done this, I've actually done this previously with eggs. So providing one type of egg that has one type of fat and then another that has a different type of fat. And then we can actually test, things like their blood. In this case, we looked at their retina function. So you absolutely can do these with humans. But at this stage, because we're kind of doing some exploring to really find out what's going on, in this case, we get to give rats different types of fats.
And so they have the similar organs to people. So what we see in rats is, have you finished doing any of those studies? Do you see the effects of the different types of fats on the rats?
Yeah, so we have done kind of the first stage. So the first stage, what we just tried to do is look at rats, and these rats have what's called metabolic syndrome. So this is what happens, and this is the same thing that happens to humans, where it's kind of a combined of a number of different conditions. So what we see maybe lots of kind of weight accumulation around the stomach area, and then we see things like insulin resistance, which is a part of diabetes, and then inflammation and all these different components. And so these particular rats, we had ones that were really, really lean rats, and then we had rats who we called hyperphagic. So they would eat and eat and eat a lot. And so when we look at those and look at their prostates, we actually see that the rats that ate a lot and ate a lot of fat, actually their prostates are huge. They're about 3 or 4 times the size of the other ones.
Wow.
Yeah.
So does it matter what type of fat those hyperphagic rats are eating, or is it, too much of any kind of fat seems to be bad, or which of the fats are, which fats are actually good for the prostate in the long run and which ones are bad?
So that is my main question. And so right now we're just kind of investigating what's happening just with this growth in consuming so much fat. But the next stage and the next study will be planned to actually specifically look at different types of fat and how the prostate does respond to that. We do have one preliminary study that was done in our lab, which kind of was brought about the idea for this study, and it just kind of happened by accident, which is what often happens with research. You find different things, and so that one showed that rats eating lard, which is very high in saturated fat, their prostates were really big and they grew a lot, whereas rats consuming that high oleic canola oil, it kind of saved them, it kind of kept them from growing. So, but that was just kind of like an extra finding. So we want to dive deeper into that.
Okay. Yeah. And that's another thing that I think doesn't always come across when we think about science and research, but that it's always building on stuff that other people have already figured out in their labs, or like, what do we need to know next? So if we get back to, a people model, I know you're kind of studying it in a rat model and looking at rat prostates, but you did say, we see hyperplasia happening in the majority of people with prostates as they age. So when should people become concerned about this and, focus on maybe these dietary choices or getting their prostate checked?
Yeah, well, I mean, the dietary choices, it really does. We tend to we're really bad as humans, as we don't like to make changes until there's already a problem, right? Mm-hmm. So I think what we really need to do, especially as a dietitian, we try to focus on promoting healthy behaviors way, way before anything bad happens, because then we prevent it from happening, right? So I would say that we already want to make sure that we're eating, really great kind of healthy diets. Not to say that we can't indulge, especially during times like this. But I think it really following, when we say kind of Canada's Food Guide, lots of people roll their eyes and they're like, that's super boring. But Canada's Food Guide is a great way to just kind of give you an idea about how we should be eating. And so lots of fruits and vegetables, lots of plant-based products, also mixed in with some great, different meats and different things, if that's what you like to eat, and getting a really well-balanced, well-rounded diet. And so starting that and learning about that early in life and then progressing that throughout your life is going to be so important. And that's not just for prostate health, that's for health overall in general. Mm-hmm. Now, when it comes to the prostate, a lot of the time, and this depends on your family history of prostate cancer or any other issues with that area of the body. But generally about age 40 and 50, men or people with a prostate will have to, get checked, and there's blood tests that can be done, and just going to your regular doctor, they can check this kind of for signs of tumor growth or just growth of the prostate. So that's a really important thing. And just getting regular checkups, your doctor would kind of push you along the right track with that.
Okay, good to know. So what's your favorite high-fat holiday treat that you're going to be indulging in?
Oh, I have lots of favorite high-fat holiday treats. So my family is a Ukrainian background, so we really love to eat things like pierogies and kubasa and all kinds of great things with tons of saturated fat, I will say, and all of the cookies and baked goods. So I became a dietitian because I love food, not just to tell people not to eat all those good things.
Yeah. So outside of the work that you're doing in the labs and whatnot, like what interested you in the research aspect of things rather than actually working out in a community? Like, the things we learn here have applications in community for sure, but what made you curious about research or pursuing that side of things?
Well, I think what really did it is I was really lucky at the end of my master's degree when I became a dietitian. I was able to start teaching nutrition courses and human physiology at the University of Winnipeg. And then I got to also teach at the University of Manitoba as well, teaching clinical nutrition. So I think what kind of got me started was that I really loved teaching, and I kind of fell in love with that side of things. And then when I had been doing my research with my master's, it just kind of all clicked and it connected, and it just kind of felt right. And so that's kind of when I decided to jump into a PhD, and here I am.
Nice. We got a really good question in the chat that just came up, just more specifically about diets and stuff. And like, when I see dietitian, I think it similarly to a lot of people, I get like my hackles up a bit because I really don't like diet culture. But that's not what dietitians do. But there are a lot of different types of diet out there that people are interested in. And one of the questions that just came up in the chat is, are ketogenic diets bad for the prostate then. And so ketogenic diet, can you explain to us what a ketogenic diet is? You're probably better at it than I am.
Sure. So the keto diet or the ketogenic diet is a really high fat, moderate protein diet. And so it's very, very low in carbohydrates. And so what lots of people kind of use this diet as for weight loss or different kinds of things. It actually came about because it helps with, my dog is howling, and so I'm sorry if you can hear that. But
my dog just came into the room and started cuddling me. You can see there's people wagging in the shadows.
Maybe they can.
Working from home is like.
I'm sorry about that. So the ketogenic diet actually came out of science looking at children with seizures. And so eating that particular diet actually prevented the seizures from happening. Yeah, so it's very interesting. But then kind of researchers went forward and were like, well, what else can we do with this interesting diet? So that being said, in the case of the prostate, you do have to be careful with a diet like the ketogenic diet, because we really, when we take on a diet, we want to do it for a long period of time. We don't just want to try it for a while and then try something else, because that's when we find things get a little iffy in our bodies. So the keto diet, we would really want to focus on eating a lot of those healthy fats. So things like using canola oils and olive oils, and even, flaxseed oils as maybe as a replacement for things like butter and lots of fat that we get from animals and, in all of those meats and things. So, potentially there could be some issues there. As a dietitian, I'd say I recommend more just an overall healthy, balanced diet and enjoying the foods that you like to eat. You don't need to cut out like all the carbohydrates like the keto diet tells you to.
Yeah. And like we've found, similarly to there are different types of fat, there are different types of carb sources that, some of them are significantly better or come along with nutrients that we really need in our bodies. But getting back to the fats, I just wanted to ask on a personal note, because I don't eat meat, but I do really like butter. And we, some of our hearts labs are studying atherosclerosis, or that's like the fatty plaque buildup. And I was very glad to read some research a little while ago about the composition of those fatty plaques, and that the sources of those don't seem to be from dairy fat as much as they do from, like rendered fats like lard or animal products. Do you know if there's any similarity for the other types of like inflammation or growth or metabolic changes between the different types of fats that affect the prostate, or is like lard and butter equally bad?
You know what? I think that's a really fantastic question. And really, when it comes to the prostate and the role of lipids and fat metabolism, we are just kind of getting started, which is why it's kind of an exciting area of research. But that would be like an excellent kind of follow-up to the studies that we're doing right now to kind of look and see, are all saturated fats created equally, or is, one's from dairy versus one's from animals like lard, or what we would get in like a steak or something like that, whether that's different. And I think that's like a great extension of what I'm doing. So maybe you should come in.
So should I apply to Dr. Suh's lab?
Just join us.
All right. Yeah. I have lots of time, not busy teaching or anything. All right. Well, I think that's about it for time. We had a few questions in the chat, but if anyone has any other questions, I can always forward them to Chelsey, and we can touch base on them in the future. But I just really want to thank you for joining us today and wish you luck with the rest of your PhD. So one last question though is, how long do you expect this part of your studies to take? So you did your master's while you were kind of in your internship or before you started this particular project. How long is this piece of your work going to take, do you think?
So a PhD in our department, it differs depending on where you are, is usually about 4, maybe 5 years, which is pretty long, but if I'd say about 4, I'm about maybe close to halfway done.
Okay, well, that's good. And you have a really nice team to work with, so that's always good too. All right. Well, thank you again for joining us.
Thank
And
you.
thank you, all of our viewers, for joining us. This chat will be available for watching in the future on our live streams as well, and forever on our YouTube channel. So be sure to check that out. You can also find us at youthbiolab.ca to check out any other program or activities that we have going. So we'll see you all after the holidays. We're going to start back up on January 14th with Don Davies, and he's working in the Division of Neurodegenerative Disorders. So he's going to share a little bit with us about new compounds that might help slow down or prevent Alzheimer's. Okay, Chelsey, you're still there, but I just ended this. Oh, I just ended